Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a battle-hardened ex-Marine seeks peace on his Texas land, a power-hungry HOA president picks the wrong man to provoke. What begins with a clipboard turns into a full-blown war of fences, fake laws, and flying shovels. This isn't just property, it's personal. I've always believed that a man should know two things better than anything else: how to grow something and how to protect it. That belief had served me well for over 2 decades in the Marine Corps, and even better now, living alone on 6 acres of red Texas dirt that I called mine, legally, spiritually, and without compromise. I wasn't looking for trouble when I moved out here. Quite the opposite. The town was small, the roads dusty, the neighbors mostly respectful. My property sat just outside the boundaries of a newer, tightly regulated residential development with a name that sounded like it had been cooked up by a marketing team in New Jersey, Riverstone Glades. A suburban utopia with gleaming sidewalks, identical mailboxes, and an HOA so obsessed with uniformity they probably had nightmares about wind chimes. I, on the other hand, had a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, a half-finished timber frame house I was building with my own hands, a shooting range in the back corner, and a garden full of peaches that didn't care one bit for neighborhood. Decorum. It wasn't pretty. It was mine, and I liked it that way. The first time I saw her, I didn't even know her name. Blonde bob, sunglasses that probably cost more than my tool shed, and a clipboard. The unholy trinity of suburban command. She parked her BMW just outside my gate like she owned the road and walked up like she expected a red carpet. I was waist deep in concrete mix at the time, setting posts for the new porch. "Excuse me," she called out, voice tight and rehearsed. "Are you the property owner?" I straightened up, brushing dust off my gloves. "That's right." She smiled like a dentist who just found a cavity. "I'm Karen Lamont, president of the Riverstone Glades Homeowners Association." I just stared at her. She pressed on. "We've been reviewing nearby parcels and noticed your property doesn't fall under HOA governance. We'd like to formally invite you to join. You'd gain access to private community amenities, 24/7 patrol coverage, and, of course, elevated neighborhood standards." I wiped my hands and leaned on the shovel. "Appreciate the offer. Not interested." Her smile twitched. "You understand, of course, that your property shares a visible border with our development. The condition of your fencing, for example, impacts our property values." I smiled back slowly. "That's why I keep my fence tall. So your values stay on your side." She left in a huff, spinning gravel with her tires. I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next couple of weeks, she returned. Sometimes alone, sometimes with clipboard-wielding flunkies who took pictures of my driveway or pointed at my gutters like they were crime scenes. She'd say things like, "We could help you modernize your landscaping," or "Your perimeter aesthetics are negatively affecting our community cohesion." I told her every time the same thing: "I'm not part of your HOA. You have no jurisdiction here." That didn't stop her from escalating. First came the letters, typed in official-looking fonts signed by the Office of Community Compliance, demanding that I address visual violations like my firewood stack and homemade storm shelter. I burned one in the fire pit and used another to line the chicken coop. Then came the anonymous complaints to the county about my unsafe conditions, which a very apologetic inspector confirmed were baseless after checking my permits and soil grading himself. One afternoon, I found a glossy pamphlet stuck to my gate latch. "Join us, or face a less harmonious future." The HOA logo was embossed in gold. I tossed it into the compost pile. It wasn't long before I started noticing small things. My mailbox open, my garden gate unlocked, a drone buzzing overhead. Raccoons didn't fly DJI Phantoms last I checked, so I installed cameras. Infrared, motion activated, angled just right. I wasn't paranoid, I was practiced. There's a difference. Then came the official visit. I was pruning a peach tree behind the house when I heard tires crunch up the gravel. I stepped out to see a white SUV with a Riverstone Glades logo on the side and 3 people climbing out like they were about to sell me solar panels. 2 men in pseudo uniforms, khaki polos, navy slacks, no name tags. The third was a woman in a light blue blouse and thick glasses, holding a clipboard like it could issue warrants. "Mr. Donovan," she said flatly, "we're here to perform a visual inspection of your property perimeter." I raised an eyebrow. "On whose authority?" "The Homeowners Association." I'm not part of your HOA. There have been multiple complaints filed regarding non-compliance with community standards. Visual disturbances have been recorded from bordering residences. Under HOA Resolution 5.4, all bordering parcels may be subject to parametric review. That sounds made up, I said. And if you cross that fence, you're trespassing. One of the men shifted like he was about to argue. The woman stepped forward. We don't want conflict, Mr. Donovan. We just need to document the rear section of your yard. Then take a picture from your side of the line. If you cross mine, I will consider it unlawful entry. Now, unless you have a court order or a badge, you can get back in that SUV and drive home. They didn't argue. Not then. They turned, climbed back into the SUV, and drove off. The next day, I got a crumpled, hand-delivered notice that read, in ballpoint pen, "You are creating a hostile barrier between communities. Further obstruction may result in action." No return address, no signature, just a little HOA logo scribbled in the corner. I laughed once. Then I went back to work. But I wasn't laughing anymore when the morning came that changed everything. It was a Thursday, when things turned from annoying to outright absurd. Morning air still hung with the scent of cut grass and diesel from the old John Deere I used to mow the north side. I was just finishing my second cup of coffee on the porch when a different white SUV, newer, shinier, pulled up to the edge of my driveway. No HOA logo this time, just a smugness you could smell before the doors even opened. 3 of them again. Same pattern. 2 men in uniform-ish outfits. 1 woman who looked like a librarian who secretly fantasized about wielding power over parking violations. But this time, they didn't bother with the driveway or the porch. They walked around the side of the property toward the garden gate, as if they knew the layout better than they should. I followed them, calm but with a shovel in one hand. Habit. The woman turned when I caught up. "Mr. Donovan, we're conducting a follow-up inspection. You were informed by our Community Advisory Council." "There is no advisory council that governs this land," I cut in. "I told your people last time. This is private property, not under HOA jurisdiction." "Unless you have a warrant, you're trespassing." One of the men stepped forward, a little too quickly. Young guy, hair buzzed down to compliance. "Sir, we have reason to believe that safety violations on this parcel pose a risk to neighboring homes." "Name one." He didn't answer, just stared with the kind of blank face that screams, "I was told not to answer questions." The woman pulled out a tablet and turned it toward me. There was a grainy image of my tool shed with the caption, "Improvised structure, possible code breach." I squinted. "That's a woodshed. For wood. The code you're quoting applies to homes within your HOA boundary. You're not the law. Our records indicate this parcel is impacting visual conformity metrics from lots 61 through 64. I couldn't help it. I laughed. She didn't. "I'm going to say this once," I said, stepping between them in the gate. "Get off my land. Take your clipboards and tablet and manufactured jargon with you, or I'll call the sheriff. And next time you show up uninvited, I won't be this polite." They hesitated just for a second, then turned around and walked out the way they came in, pretending to maintain dignity while being escorted by a barefoot man holding a shovel. As they drove off, I caught one of the men glancing back through the window. He didn't look angry. He looked embarrassed. Good. 2 days later, I found a folded piece of paper taped to my mailbox. No envelope, no name. Handwritten in aggressive cursive. "Your aggressive behavior has been noted. Continued resistance will escalate response." At the bottom, a shaky sketch of a logo that vaguely resembled a badge but more closely resembled a discount chiropractor's emblem. I scanned it and added it to a folder on my laptop labeled HOA Idiocy. That folder was growing faster than my tomatoes. That weekend, I spent most of Saturday building a new gate. Steel frame, lockable, reinforced hinges. If they wanted in again, they'd need bolt cutters and a good explanation. Sunday morning, I woke up to find a new surprise. My power was out. Now, I'm not one to jump to conclusions. I leave that to internet forums and HOA presidents. But I'd had 0 outages in the year I'd been living here. And sure enough, when I checked the breaker and the meter, everything looked fine. Until I followed the external conduit and found the main line cover pried open. Clean job. Like it had been done by someone who knew exactly how to shut down the property without tripping every alarm. Luckily for me, I'd installed a backup generator behind the shed. Kicked on like a charm. Coffee was back in 10 minutes. Cameras, 15. But that little blackout confirmed something for me. This wasn't just bureaucratic pestering anymore. This was strategic. Someone wanted to make life uncomfortable, difficult. They were laying groundwork for something bigger. Monday morning, I received a padded envelope in my mailbox. Inside, a glossy trifold brochure, the HOA again, titled "When You Refuse to Cooperate, What Happens Next?" It was surreal. It outlined a 5-step community escalation protocol as if it were military doctrine. Things like visual documentation, formal notifications, neutral third-party interventions, and then finally, collective corrective action. Not a single page referenced law enforcement, court orders, or actual government. Just this alternate universe where they thought they had real authority. The last page included a list of recently reintegrated properties, lots that, according to the HOA, had been successfully brought under regulation through persistent engagement. Like they were bragging about forced compliance. I knew then I needed to get ahead of this. I dug out the original deed to my land, the boundary surveys, every form and filing I had, made copies, had my neighbor Sam, a retired notary, certify them. I stored the originals in my safe and sent digitals to my lawyer friend Vince over in Amarillo. I wasn't just some cranky loner with a bunker full of peaches. I was ready. Later that evening, I spotted the same white SUV parked half a block away, lights off. Nobody got out, just sat there, watching. They thought I'd roll over. They didn't know who I was. Tuesday morning started like most others, early, quiet, and covered in dew. I was halfway through my usual routine, doing pull-ups on the steel bar welded into the frame outside my garage. Sweat dripped onto the gravel. Ranger, my German shepherd, paced the perimeter like clockwork, occasionally stopping to sniff the air or pee on the exact same fence post he did every day. Life had rhythm out here, rhythm and discipline. That's probably why I noticed the sound right away. A sharp metallic click. Not natural, not wind, not a branch, not even a squirrel messing with something it shouldn't. This was deliberate. Metal on metal, a lock being tampered with. I dropped from the bar, grabbed my towel, and jogged around the side of the house. Motion-activated floodlights already triggered. 3 of them. 2 men and a woman scaling the back fence with the grace of accountants pretending to be Navy SEALs. One already halfway over, another straddling the top rail with bolt cutters in hand, and the third filming the whole thing with a body-mounted camera like this was some sort of reality show. "You've got 5 seconds to stop what you're doing," I barked, loud enough to startle a murder of crows out of the trees. The guy with the cutters dropped down into my yard like he'd done it before. "You're interfering with the lawful duties of community oversight," he shouted back. "No, son," I said, stepping forward, voice calm but steel-wrapped. "You're trespassing on private property. That's a felony." The woman, now fully over the fence, pulled a laminated sheet out of her pocket and waved it like it meant something. HOA Directive 12.3. "Not worth the paper it's printed on," I cut in. "I'm not part of your HOA. Never was. You have no legal authority here." Then one of them, a pudgy guy with a clipboard and tactical vest that probably came from a surplus store, reached into his pocket. That was the moment. Everything slowed down. Now I've trained for combat in deserts, mountains, forests, cities, with real threats, real weapons, real consequences. And while I didn't expect a shootout in my own backyard with HOA cosplayers, I wasn't about to take a chance. I moved. Fast. My hand reached for the closest tool within arm's length. The garden spade. Solid steel. Good weight. I flung it like a tomahawk, flat and spinning. Thunk. It slammed square into clipboard guy's chest, not blade first, but flat, knocking him back into a bush like a stunned possum. I closed the distance on bolt cutters, twisting his arm into a lock and dropping him to the dirt with a knee between his shoulder blades. His yelp sounded more like a choked apology than resistance. Camera girl turned to run. Ranger was faster. He didn't bite, just blocked her path like a hairy linebacker, growling low enough to vibrate the ground. I jogged up behind her, not winded. She froze, camera still blinking red on her vest. "We didn't know. We were told." "Yeah," I said. "You were told wrong. I herded all 3 of them into the grass and told them to lie face down, arms spread, no sudden moves. Then I pulled out my phone, dialed the sheriff, and waited. They tried talking. I didn't answer. Clipboard guy had caught his breath and was now moaning about a possible fractured rib. Bolt cutters kept muttering about visual nonconformity violations. The woman started crying, real crocodile stuff. Ranger sat beside me, tongue out, panting like it was a game. 15 minutes later, sirens. 2 cruisers rolled up, lights flashing. First out of the car was Deputy Lance Hayes. Good guy, former National Guard, someone I'd had beers with at the local VFW. He took one look at the scene, the tools, the broken fence latch, the spade in the dirt, and raised his eyebrows. "They really climbed your fence?" he asked. "Right over," I said. "Caught it all on camera." I showed him the footage from the live security feed. Crystal clear. 3 individuals unlawfully entering my land, holding equipment, filming, acting under fake authority. He nodded, then knelt by clipboard guy. "You got any ID?" The guy tried to hand him the laminated HOA directive. Lance chuckled. "No, I mean real ID. Driver's license. State issued. Badge. Anything that doesn't look like it was printed at Office Depot." None of them had it. Not even the woman. Just matching badges that read Community Enforcement Volunteer in Comic Sans font. One of them even had a QR code, which, when scanned, led to a broken Google Docs link. Within 20 minutes, all 3 were in cuffs. Trespassing, impersonation, conspiracy, and attempted intimidation. Probably a few more charges once the paperwork was filed. Lance promised to dig into it deeper, especially the woman's claim that Karen said it was authorized. That name got a reaction from both deputies. Karen Lamont, one of them muttered, "She's on thin ice already." I gave my full statement. Provided the footage. Walked them through where the fence had been cut, where the tools were dropped, where the spade had landed. Bolt Cutter's guy asked if I was pressing charges. "You better believe I am." By the time the cruisers pulled away with my would-be home invaders in the back seats, the sun was already up over the ridge, shining golden over my orchard. Ranger barked once, then sat by my boots like we'd just finished another drill. I looked at the spot where they'd come over the fence. Then I looked at the spade, now bent slightly at the shaft. I left it right there in the dirt, as a warning. The station was cool and quiet. Fluorescent lights, linoleum floors, and that faint chemical tang of Windex mixed with burnt coffee. I sat across from Deputy Hayes, my forearms resting on the table, a manila folder between us labeled Trespassing Incident, Donovan Property. To my right, a flash drive loaded with security footage. To my left, a hot cup of station coffee that tasted like regret and cardboard. 3 suspects in custody, Hayes said, flipping through the initial intake forms. None of them have formal law enforcement certification. 2 don't even have clean records. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of records? One was fined for impersonating a building inspector 2 years ago, tried to shake down an elderly couple for roof violations. The other, well, minor stuff. Vandalism, drunk and disorderly, but nothing that screams authorized community authority. He leaned back and exhaled. "You sure know how to pick your enemies." "I didn't pick them," I said. "They showed up with bolt cutters." The body cam footage, my own camera recordings, and their own GoPro disaster made the case rock solid. Hayes had already gone over them twice. We watched the moment again. The second guy stumbling over my fence with the bolt cutters, the woman filming, the scripted line about visual disturbance, and my shovel flying through the air like a fastball from hell. "Damn good throw," Hayes muttered, not for the first time. "I used to teach precision strikes with entrenching tools," I said. This was just nostalgia. He grinned and pushed the folder toward me. "I'm submitting charges for trespassing, impersonation of enforcement, and criminal conspiracy. You want to add anything civil on top of that? I'd recommend a lawyer. This one's got meat. Already ahead of him. I'd spoken to Vince in Amarillo that same afternoon. Ex-JAG, sharp as they come. He told me, these people think HOA bylaws give them real-world authority. It's like toddlers with walkie-talkies pretending they're the police. We filed for a restraining order that same day against the 3 individuals and against the HOA's right to engage with me directly. Vince also began preparing a civil case against the HOA board itself, citing gross misconduct, unauthorized enforcement actions, and orchestrated harassment. But what really changed everything wasn't the paperwork. It was the fallout. 2 days after the arrest, local news picked up the story. Homeowner fights back against rogue HOA raid. Someone at the sheriff's office must have leaked the footage. Suddenly, my inbox was full of subject lines like, HOA abuse stories wanted, can we interview you? And my voicemail filled with people from 3 counties over, thanking me for standing up to the tyrants in polos. That would have been enough. Excitement for a month, but things moved fast. Hayes called me back, and 3 days later, when I walked in, he had that look on his face, the one you get when you find a whole new level of stupid hiding behind the first. "We traced the planning of the break-in back to your old friend," he said, "Karen Lamont." I wasn't surprised. She sent out an internal memo to the HOA board, he continued, sliding over a printed email. Subject line, Covert Assessment Initiative. She called it a necessary escalation. I read the contents. Karen had commissioned the 3 individuals for a non-invasive evaluation of my property boundaries, citing her authority under Special Community Preservation Directives, which, of course, don't exist anywhere outside the fantasy land she'd built in her mind. She didn't put her signature on it, Hayes said, but we got the email headers. It's hers. That was enough for a subpoena. By the end of the week, Karen was brought in for questioning. I didn't see it, but Hayes filled me in. She came in wearing a blazer and pearls like she was attending a brunch fundraiser, tried to brush it all off as a misunderstanding, then tried to play the victim. Claimed she feared for her community's safety and simply wanted to ensure the neighborhood maintained its peaceful image. According to the deputies, the real shift happened when she realized just how much of her plan had been documented. The video, evidence, the unauthorized memo, the email chain where she referred to me as a threat to local cohesion and called my house a visual cancer. That last phrase didn't land well with the county prosecutor. Charges weren't filed immediately, but the investigation was officially opened. In the meantime, Karen was ordered to have no contact with me, direct or indirect, and the HOA board was placed under review for potential systemic abuse of authority. The cherry on top? A week after Karen's interview, I got a visit from one of the HOA members, guy named Clark, nervous type, balding, wore socks with sandals. He handed me a sealed manila envelope and said, "Please don't think we're all like her." Inside, an unsigned letter from a board member, probably Clark himself, apologizing for recent escalations, stating that Karen had acted without full consensus and that a vote for her removal was being considered. Too little, too late. Vince had everything documented. We were moving forward, and I wasn't planning to back down, not after they tried to invade my home, shut off my power, and weaponize bureaucracy like a pack of overgrown hall monitors with a god complex. They wanted a war of forms and fences. Fine, I knew how to fight wars. They say when someone's desperate, they get stupid. Karen must have been real desperate. About a week after the investigation into her started, things on my property finally went quiet. No cars parked down the road, no pamphlets, no HOA scouts with binoculars pretending to birdwatch while holding clipboards. It felt unnatural. Calm in the wrong places, like a clearing before a storm. I didn't trust it, so I did what any man trained to expect the worst would do. I ran my perimeter twice a day, once at dawn, once at dusk. I checked camera feeds, looked for footprints near the fence, checked locks. Nothing seemed out of place until Wednesday morning. I was in the orchard trimming back a peach limb that had gone greedy when Ranger started growling. Not the playful bark he gives to deer or squirrels, the deep-chested growl that meant something human was wrong. I followed him past the shed, down the slope toward the dry creek bed that cut through the rear edge of my land, and that's when I saw it. 2 rust-colored plastic drums half buried in the brush, tucked under a tarp so weathered it looked like it had been there for months. But I knew every inch of that slope. That tarp wasn't there 2 days ago. I approached slowly, pulled the tarp back with the end of my shovel. Hazmat stickers, one of them peeling, the other one freshly applied. They looked like they'd come off a printer yesterday. The barrels were sealed with those twist-lock tops, standard industrial storage. No label, no paperwork, just enough to look suspicious to someone who didn't know better. If I hadn't spent 6 years guarding military depots full of the real thing, I might have panicked. But these weren't heavy enough to hold liquid. I pried one open. Inside, sandbags, not even chemical. Just weight. It was a setup. I didn't touch anything else. Just backed away, grabbed my phone, and reviewed the camera feed from the night before. Bingo. At 3:14 a.m., a figure in dark clothes and a hoodie, face obscured, climbed the rear fence with a dolly cart, dragged the drums across the grass like a man on a deadline, planted them right where I found them, tarped them, gone in less than 10 minutes. Not a single light. Professional enough to avoid motion detection until he crossed a blind spot near the creek. What he didn't know was that I'd recently installed a wide-angle thermal cam behind the compost bin. It caught the whole damn thing. Body heat, movement, timestamps. I sent the video to Vince and called Deputy Hayes. He arrived an hour later with 2 cruisers and an evidence van. They handled the drums like they were real. Gloves, masks, containment gear. I didn't blame them. You don't assume a bluff when the stakes involve toxic waste. But once they cracked both drums and found sand and lead weights, it was clear. The point wasn't harm. The point was evidence. Fake evidence. Whoever did this knew enough to make it look like a violation, Hayes muttered, inspecting the hazmat decals. Hell, from a drone camera or patrol chopper, this would have looked like you were stockpiling illegal waste. That was the idea, I said. Probably supposed to justify a third-party inspection or another midnight visit. He nodded grimly. Or get the EPA sniffing around, maybe even the feds, if they thought you were running unlicensed disposal or storage. This could have gone federal fast. We pulled fingerprints, footprints, even tire tracks where the dolly had dug into softer ground. The tires were fresh. Hayes photographed everything, then sent a sample of the decals to the lab. A day later, we had a match. One of the prints on the barrel matched a certain clipboard-carrying genius from the backyard raid. The same guy I'd dropped with a garden spade 2 weeks ago. And guess what? That same idiot was still under investigation for breaking probation. Now he just added felony tampering and obstruction of justice to the pile. Even better, the decals used on the barrels had been purchased from a print shop in the next county under an HOA expense account. Karen's signature was on the invoice. That was the moment everything shifted. Until now, the assumption was Karen was just another deluded bureaucrat gone rogue. But this was intent, strategy. She didn't just overstep, she weaponized her position and spent HOA funds to fabricate criminal activity on private land. The DA took one look at the compiled case file and opened a second investigation. This time, criminal conspiracy, falsification of evidence, and malicious misuse of organizational funds. Vince was already drafting the civil amendments. That afternoon, a county hazmat officer dropped by my place just to tell me, off the record, that if those barrels had been called in by a nosy neighbor or drone footage, they'd have likely evacuated a 1-mile radius and brought in federal response teams. I would have been dragged through 6 months of inspections, media, hearings, and lawsuits, all of it based on a lie. That evening, I stood at the back fence where the man had come through. The grass was still pressed from his steps. I set up another floodlight, aimed it dead center on that blind spot. I added 2 new trail cams, 1 thermal, 1 high-res night vision, synced them to a separate hard drive in a locked ammo can. They wanted to play dirty? Good. I fought in places with no rules, where lies were weapons and truth was buried under propaganda. I survived that too. I wasn't just defending property anymore. This had become a full-on war of integrity, and I wasn't about to lose it to a woman in pearls and a playbook full of fake bylaws. I barely slept the next few nights. Not because I was scared, I'd slept through sandstorms and firefights, but because I knew the kind of people I was dealing with now. They didn't give up, they adapted. And when you take away their illusions of power, they don't retreat. They double down. So I stayed ready. Every camera, sensor, and floodlight on my property was tested, upgraded, recalibrated. I added 2 decoy motion sensors, 1 fake, 1 real, to draw attention away from the thermal scope I mounted behind the old greenhouse. I wasn't just watching my land anymore, I was baiting it. Then came the hit. Friday morning, just before sunrise, I reviewed the overnight feed. Nothing for hours. Until 3:22 a.m. 3 figures, night gear, all black, balaclavas, gloves. One had a GoPro strapped to his chest. Another carried what looked like a small drone in a case. The third was holding a clipboard, because of course they were. They breached the same rear fence as the last crew. Not over. Through. Someone had removed a section of the lower mesh earlier that day, probably while pretending to jog or walk a dog along the back trail. They slithered in like raccoons on a mission. The GoPro guy whispered something. I caught it later on audio analysis. Start filming now. Focus on the barrels. The barrels. They were gone, of course, seized by the county after the last stunt. But these geniuses apparently didn't know that. So now they were trying to recreate the scene, acting like they'd caught me with illegal material on tape. One of them even staged a moment, pretending to stumble over a buried drum that wasn't there, while shouting things like, "Yup, Definitely hazardous. This confirms it. It was so badly choreographed, I almost pitied them. Almost. At 3:28 a.m., they started sweeping their lights toward my compost bins and generator box, filming and narrating nonsense like illegal power routing and unregistered storage tanks. I sat watching this live from my tablet, sipping cold coffee. Ranger asleep beside me, unaware he was about to have the best morning of his life. I tapped a single button. 30,000 lumens of halogen floodlight slammed on from 6 different angles. The backyard lit up like a football stadium during halftime. Then came the siren, a custom mod I'd rigged using parts from an old civil defense box. Sharp, fast, and piercing as hell. The 3 invaders scattered instantly. The one with the clipboard screamed and dropped it. GoPro guy tried to run straight for the fence and hit the wire hard enough to bounce off it backwards. The third slipped in the wet grass and slammed face first into the compost pile. Ranger was already on his feet, barking like a beast. I didn't even have to say a word. He sprinted out ahead of me as I opened the back door and followed with my flashlight and Glock holstered just in case. I got to them before they could regroup. Hands on the ground. Don't test me. Clipboard man was already flat. The one from the compost pile groaned and rolled to his side. GoPro guy tried to stand. Ranger lunged, barking 3 inches from his face, and that was the end of his resistance. I didn't need to restrain them. The law did that for me, because as I stood there dialing Hayes, I could hear the faint, panicked voice from GoPro guy's chest cam. Still recording, still streaming to somewhere. We need backup. Kay is gonna kill us if we screw this up. Kay. That's all I needed. Sheriff's deputies arrived in 14 minutes. This time, they didn't ask questions. They just took notes and started zip-tying wrists. They bagged the GoPro, took screenshots from my tablet, collected the clipboard as evidence, which hilariously included a printed inspection checklist with pre-filled comments like unregistered tank, visual confirmed, and photo evidence captured. One of the deputies, a younger guy named Morales, pulled me aside. "You mind if we review the camera cache now?" "Be my guest." He watched the footage, slow and silent. Then he whistled. This wasn't a break-in, he said. This was an operation. They were right. The movements, the coordination, the fact they used a drone to try and scan my shed from above. This wasn't amateurs fumbling around anymore. Someone was giving them structure, orders. Hayes showed up an hour later, barely out of bed, but wide awake after 10 seconds of reviewing the footage. "This is organized harassment," he muttered. "And I think we just got what we needed." They pulled one of the suspects aside, the one who dropped the clipboard, and started asking soft questions. He folded in under 5 minutes, said they'd been hired by a consultant for the HOA. Paid in cash, given gear, given instructions. Hayes asked if the consultant had a name. The kid swallowed and whispered, "Karen." That was it. This wasn't just HOA overreach anymore. It was a planned smear campaign. A staged criminal narrative designed to destroy my reputation and potentially trigger state or federal intervention. And the president of a homeowners association had orchestrated it like a community theater production of Enemy of the State. Only one problem: she picked the wrong damn protagonist. By the following week, the sheriff's department had handed the case off to the county prosecutor. What had started as a trespassing report was now 2 folders thick and labeled State of Texas versus Karen Lamont et al. Criminal conspiracy, evidence tampering, harassment. Vince couldn't hide the satisfaction in his voice when he called. "We're going scorched earth," he said. "Civil, criminal, financial. By the time we're done with her, she'll be lucky if she's allowed to organize a bake sale without a state supervisor." And I believed him, because the more we dug, the worse it got. Turns out Karen's HOA wasn't just petty and power drunk. It was financially corrupt. Over the next several days, subpoenas went out. HOA board members were questioned under oath. One cracked almost immediately and turned over meeting minutes from the past 2 years. The content made my jaw tighten. Misuse of discretionary HOA funds for unsanctioned enforcement activities. False HOA welcome packages given to new buyers that falsely claimed mandatory compliance with HOA rules, even for plots like mine, outside the jurisdiction. Neighborhood maintenance contributions collected in cash. No receipts, no tracking, no accounting trail. They weren't running a community association. They were running a soft extortion racket dressed up in suburban khakis. Meanwhile, Karen had lawyered up. She went quiet, No press statements, no appearances at HOA meetings, no little neighborhood strolls in her heels and sunglasses. But the damage was done. The county opened an audit of the HOA's finances. The IRS was notified, and in the civil lane, Vince filed our lawsuit, Clayton Donovan versus Riverstone Glades HOA and Karen Lamont personally. Charges: harassment, trespassing, conspiracy to defame, attempted evidence fabrication, emotional distress, property damage, attempted civil fraud through fraudulent representation of jurisdiction. We served them through their legal counsel. I made sure it was hand-delivered during one of their emergency board meetings. But the part that really got under their skin was when Vince requested a temporary injunction against any further action by the HOA toward me or my property, effective immediately. The judge granted it within 48 hours. That meant no letters. No flyers, no unauthorized visits, no neighbor complaints. Nothing. If I so much as found another anonymous memo on my gate, they'd be in contempt of court. I started sleeping again. Sort of. The local news came knocking. They wanted interviews. I said no. This wasn't about fame. It was about principle. But Vince agreed to speak off-record to a few outlets. The headlines hit hard. HOA president accused of orchestrating criminal break-in. Veteran targeted by rogue HOA, fights back. Fake inspections, real charges, inside a Texas HOA meltdown. I was back at work on the Porch Foundation when the first deposition date was announced. Karen would be required to appear in court under subpoena and testify under oath. I cleaned my boots that day like it was Sunday service. The hearing was set in the county courthouse, a plain, square building where justice didn't wear robes, just bad fluorescent lighting and coffee-stained clipboards. I sat across from Karen for the first time since all this started. She didn't look so confident anymore. No pearls, no clipboard, just tired eyes, a lawyer whispering in her ear, and a stack of affidavits that could bury a political campaign. When the prosecutor asked if she had authorized or financed the 2 break-ins onto my land, her lawyer tried to block it. The judge overruled. Karen hesitated, then said, "I believed we were acting in the best interest of the community." Wrong answer, because that phrasing, "we," opened the door for the prosecutor to bring in the entire board's complicity. Every misused dollar, every fabricated form, every coerced homeowner who'd been pressured into signing documents they didn't understand. And suddenly, Karen wasn't just a rogue president. She was the head of a conspiracy. The prosecutor leaned in. "Did you personally approve the purchase of false identification badges used by unlicensed personnel?" Karen blinked. "Yes or no?" She looked down. "Yes." It was quiet after that. The court set a trial date. Outside the courthouse, I shook Vince's hand. That went better than expected. He nodded. "Oh, it gets better." The next day, HOA members started resigning. 3 in one morning. The treasurer cut ties and released a statement. I was unaware of the extent of misconduct and cannot, in good conscience, remain. The HOA's liability insurance dropped them. Vendors backed out of maintenance contracts. One local security firm refused to patrol Riverstone Glades until governance issues were resolved. It was collapsing. Karen made one last move. A desperate press release claiming she was being targeted by extremist property owners and that her actions were misrepresented. Nobody cared. I wasn't the one who staged a fake crime scene in someone's backyard. Courtroom 3 was packed, not in the live-action drama kind of way, but with tight-lipped residents, folded arms, and HOA board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. News cameras weren't allowed inside, but the hallway was lined with local press and a few activists holding signs that read things like "HOAs aren't governments" and "Property rights equals civil rights." I sat in the front row with Vince. Suit pressed. Boots shined, same belt I wore in the Corv. My spine was straight, but my fists stayed loose. I wasn't here to intimidate. I was here to finish it clean. The prosecution laid it out like clockwork. Trespassing, impersonation, tampering, harassment. Emails from Karen, video evidence from the break-ins, financial records tracing community funds to false operations, footage from the GoPro they were dumb enough to bring. Then came the part that sealed it. An elderly couple testified, new to the neighborhood, who'd been told by Karen that if they didn't pay an initial compliance bond, their landscaping would be forcibly corrected. Another man told the court how he was fined for a visual. Infraction because he'd left a ladder in his driveway for more than 3 hours. He wasn't even part of the HOA. It wasn't just about me anymore. Karen sat still. Her lawyer barely spoke. When the judge ruled, his voice was calm. No theatrics, just the law. The court finds Karen Lamont guilty of conspiracy to commit trespass, fraudulent use of association resources, and orchestrating the harassment of a private citizen through unlawful means. Sentenced to 2 years of probation with weekends in custody for 9 months, fined $55,000, and barred from holding any office in a registered community organization. She blinked. Once. That was all. The 2 men who'd broken into my property, GoPro and clipboard, were each given 6 months suspended sentence, community service, and mandatory counseling. The woman from the first inspection raid got off lighter, but only because she cooperated and testified. And the HOA. That was where Vince really went to work. The court ordered Riverstone Glades HOA to pay me $120,000 in damages, half for emotional and reputational harm, half for legal and property-related costs. Publicly issue a statement acknowledging their actions were outside legal bounds, submit to a full external audit, and restructure under a court-appointed interim board. The board was disbanded within a week. Karen resigned before they could fire her. Her house went up for sale 2 months later, listed as motivated seller, price to move. No one came to her going-away party. You'd think that would be the best part, but it wasn't. The best part came a month later, in the form of a knock at my gate. It was the same neighbor who once glared at me for my aggressive signage. Middle-aged, buttoned up, the kind of man who probably balanced his checkbook with a ruler. He cleared his throat and said, "I just wanted to say, I think we were wrong. About you. About this whole mess." He handed me a fresh peach cobbler in a foil tin. Didn't say much else. After that, they started waving when they drove by. I didn't wave back. Not at first. But I started nodding. That was enough. I didn't rebuild the broken fence panel. I left it as is. Reinforced, but slightly scorched from the motion-activated spotlight I'd wired to go off at random intervals. On the inside of the gate, I hung a simple wooden sign. Private land, not under HOA. You step in, you deal with me. No threats, no nonsense, just truth. I still train every morning, still work on the house, still take Ranger for laps around the property. But now, I get the occasional visitor from 2 streets over, quiet folks with serious questions. How do I check if my property's actually under HOA? Do I need to pay these fees? Can they really do this? I help them out. I show them where to find their plats, explain their rights, teach them how to push back with words before they ever need a shovel. Funny how quickly a rogue HOA can turn a guy into a local myth.